Chapter 1: The Motivation Illusion. There is a common belief that motivation is something you either have or don't have. A force that arrives, lifts you, and makes action feel easy. When motivation is present, you move. When it is absent, you wait. This belief feels logical, almost obvious, but it is also one of the most damaging illusions shaping how people relate to action. The motivation trap does not look like resistance. It looks like patience. It tells you that you are being reasonable, that you are simply waiting for the right internal state. In reality, this waiting quietly reinforces the very paralysis you want to escape. Motivation is not a prerequisite for action. It is a response to it. But the trap convinces you otherwise. You learn to monitor your internal state before moving. You ask yourself whether you feel inspired enough, focused enough, ready enough. When the answer is no, you postpone. This postponement feels justified because it is framed as self-awareness. You are not avoiding. You are waiting to do it properly. Over time, this pattern trains your nervous system to associate action with a specific emotional condition. If that condition is not present, the system shuts down movement. The trap tightens. The illusion becomes stronger because motivation does sometimes appear. There are days when you wake up energized and productive. On those days, everything feels easier. Tasks flow. You move without friction. This reinforces the belief that motivation is the engine. What is overlooked is that these days are not the cause of progress. They are the exception. They occur when emotional load is low, expectations are light, and identity is not threatened. They are not reliable. When you build your system around these rare states, you create instability. You wait for conditions that cannot be summoned on demand. The absence of motivation then feels like a problem that must be solved before action can begin. The mind starts searching for ways to generate motivation. You consume content. You watch videos. You read advice. You look for the missing spark. This search becomes a substitute for action. It feels productive, but it does not change the underlying pattern. In fact, it strengthens it. You are teaching your system that action requires a specific feeling. Without that feeling, nothing happens. Motivation becomes a gatekeeper. The trap is subtle because it feels aligned with self-care. You tell yourself you do not want to force things. You want to feel aligned, inspired, in the right headspace. But alignment is not something that appears before movement. It emerges through engagement. Waiting for motivation is like waiting for warmth before lighting a fire. The fire creates the warmth. The same is true here. Action generates motivation, not the other way around. Another layer of the trap is identity-based. Many people see themselves as motivated or unmotivated. This becomes part of the story they tell about who they are. When motivation is low, they interpret it as confirmation of a personal flaw. This creates shame. Shame drains energy. Energy loss reduces motivation further. The loop closes. The trap feeds itself. Motivation is also confused with desire. You may deeply want something and still feel unmotivated to pursue it. This contradiction feels distressing. You begin to question your values. You wonder whether you truly care. In reality, desire and motivation operate on different levels. Desire is about meaning. Motivation is about nervous system readiness. When the system perceives threat, overload, or emotional risk, motivation drops regardless of desire. Waiting for motivation in these moments is waiting for the system to feel safe without changing the conditions that make it feel unsafe. It will not happen. The motivation trap also keeps you in evaluation mode. You constantly assess how you feel before acting. This self-monitoring increases self-focus. Increased self-focus amplifies doubt and hesitation. The more you check for motivation, the less likely it is to appear. This is not because you are broken, but because attention itself shapes experience. When attention is turned inward in search of a specific feeling, absence becomes more noticeable. The mind fixates on what is missing. This creates pressure. Pressure suppresses motivation further. The trap is reinforced by language. Phrases like, "I just don't feel motivated," sound neutral, but they carry an implicit rule. No motivation means no action. Over time, this rule becomes unquestioned. It shapes decisions automatically. You do not choose to wait, you default to it. Motivation becomes a permission slip. Without it, you feel you are not allowed to start. This externalizes agency. You are no longer deciding when to act. You are waiting for an internal signal you do not control. This creates passivity. Passivity feels frustrating, but it also feels safe. As long as motivation has not arrived, you are not responsible for not acting. The trap protects you from self-blame in the short term while creating stagnation in the long term. There is also a performance aspect to motivation. Many people believe that starting without motivation will lead to poor results. They fear low-quality effort. They fear confirming inadequacy. Motivation becomes associated with competence. You believe you need to feel motivated in order to perform well. But competence is built through repetition, not emotional states. Waiting for motivation delays the practice that would actually increase skill and confidence. The fear of doing it poorly keeps you from doing it at all. The trap convinces you that waiting is improving future performance. In reality, it is eroding trust in your ability to act under imperfect conditions. Motivation is not stable because it is not meant to be. It fluctuates with sleep, stress, mood, and context. Building a life that depends on it is like building a structure on shifting ground. The motivation trap is not about laziness or lack of ambition. It is about misunderstanding how action works. Action is a regulatory process. It is supported by clarity, containment, and safety, not by inspiration alone. When these elements are present, movement becomes possible even without motivation. When they are absent, motivation cannot compensate. Recognizing the illusion is the first step out of the trap. Noticing how often you wait for a feeling before acting reveals how much power you have given away. Motivation was never meant to lead, it was meant to follow. In the next chapter, we will explore why motivation often disappears precisely when something matters, and how emotional significance changes the system's response to action. Chapter 2. Why motivation disappears when something matters. One of the most confusing aspects of motivation is that it often fades exactly where it is most needed. You can feel motivated about trivial things, easy tasks, or distant goals. But when an action carries real meaning, real consequence, or real change, motivation tends to drop. This is not a flaw in character. It is a predictable response of the nervous system. Meaning increases emotional stakes. Emotional stakes activate protection. Protection suppresses motivation. The system is not trying to stop you from succeeding. It is trying to prevent emotional overload. When something matters, the outcome becomes relevant to your identity. The action is no longer just an action. It becomes a statement about who you are, what you are capable of, and what you deserve. This identity relevance increases sensitivity. The system anticipates evaluation, judgment, or loss. Even if no one else is watching, your internal observer becomes active. The body reacts before the mind can rationalize. Motivation drops as a way to slow things down. It creates distance between you and potential emotional exposure. This is why you can feel energized to organize, plan, or think about an important task, but feel resistant when it comes time to actually do it. Planning keeps the action abstract. Abstraction feels safer. Concrete action feels irreversible. Once you act, something becomes real. Real things can disappoint. They can fall short. They can be seen. The nervous system prefers ambiguity to exposure. Motivation disappears not because you do not care, but because you care too much without sufficient emotional containment. Another reason motivation fades is expectation. When something matters, expectations rise. You may expect yourself to perform well, to be consistent, to justify the importance you placed on the goal. These expectations add pressure. Pressure signals threat. Threat suppresses approach behavior. The system shifts into caution. It conserves energy. motivation is not withdrawn as punishment, it is withdrawn as regulation. The trap forms when you interpret this withdrawal as a personal failure. You tell yourself that if you were truly committed, motivation would be there. This interpretation adds shame. Shame further reduces motivation. The loop tightens. You may try to counter this by pushing yourself harder or consuming motivational content. But pressure layered on pressure rarely restores movement. It increases internal noise. The system becomes overwhelmed and chooses stillness. Motivation is also sensitive to uncertainty. Important actions usually involve unknown outcomes. You cannot fully predict how things will unfold or how you will feel afterward. The nervous system dislikes uncertainty, especially when identity is involved. It prefers known discomfort to unknown possibility. Motivation thrives in predictable environments. It fades when the path ahead is unclear. Waiting for motivation in these situations is waiting for certainty that cannot exist. The system is asking for guarantees that action cannot provide. Another subtle factor is emotional memory. If past attempts at important things led to disappointment, criticism, or burnout, the body remembers. It does not remember the story. It remembers the sensation. When a similar situation arises, the system prepares to avoid that sensation. Motivation drops automatically. This happens even if circumstances are different. The body responds to pattern, not logic. Understanding this reframes resistance. It is not laziness, it is memory. Motivation also disappears when actions are linked to self-worth. If success would make you feel valuable and failure would make you feel inadequate, the emotional stakes become extreme. Extreme stakes create paralysis. The system prefers no outcome to a potentially devastating one. Motivation cannot survive under that weight. It is replaced by avoidance disguised as waiting. The motivation trap deepens when you try to fix motivation instead of addressing the conditions that suppress it. You may ask how to feel more motivated rather than how to make the action emotionally safer. This keeps attention on the symptom rather than the cause. Motivation is an indicator, not a tool. It reflects the state of the system. When the system feels overloaded, motivation drops. Restoring motivation requires changing the environment of action, not forcing the feeling itself. This environment includes how much is expected, how outcomes are framed, and how you treat yourself during effort. Motivation returns when the system perceives that engagement will not lead to harm. This harm is not physical, it is emotional. When action is paired with self-attack, unrealistic expectations, or identity threat, motivation disappears. When action is paired with containment, neutrality, and permission to be imperfect, motivation becomes less necessary. Action can proceed without it. Over time, something shifts. You may notice that motivation begins to appear after you start, not before. It emerges as a byproduct of engagement. This can feel surprising if you are used to waiting for it. The system updates its expectations based on experience. It learns that action does not automatically lead to overwhelm or self-judgment. Motivation becomes a response again, not a gatekeeper. The key insight is this: motivation disappears when something matters because the system is responding to emotional risk. Waiting for motivation does not reduce that risk, it prolongs it. The only way out is not to chase motivation, but to reduce the emotional cost of starting. In the next chapter, we will explore how small, contained action bypasses the motivation trap entirely, and why starting small is not weakness, but strategy. Chapter 3. Starting small is not weakness, it is strategy. One of the strongest beliefs sustaining the motivation trap is the idea that real progress requires a strong push, that if an action matters, it should be approached with intensity, commitment, and full engagement. Starting small can feel dishonest, almost like cheating. You may think that if you cannot do it properly, you should not do it at all. This belief sounds principled, but it misunderstands how the nervous system initiates movement. Starting small is not a compromise of standards. It is a method of regulation. The system does not respond to importance by mobilizing more energy. It responds by increasing caution. When a task is framed as large, meaningful, or identity defining, the emotional load rises. Motivation drops. Resistance increases. The body prepares for threat. In this state, asking for full engagement is unrealistic. The system needs evidence of safety before it can release energy. Small starts provide that evidence. They signal that engagement will be limited, contained, and survivable. This reduces perceived risk. Action becomes possible. Many people resist small starts because they equate them with lack of seriousness. But seriousness is not measured by intensity. It is measured by consistency. Small, repeated actions create more change than rare bursts of motivated effort. The motivation trap convinces you that you need to feel ready to commit fully. Starting small bypasses this requirement. It allows you to begin without negotiating with motivation. The system does not need to feel inspired to tolerate 5 minutes of contact. It can handle that. The key is that the action must truly be small. Not small in theory, but small in the body. If you tell yourself you will work for 5 minutes, but secretly expect to continue longer, the system senses the deception. Trust is broken. Resistance returns. A true small start includes permission to stop without consequence. This permission is not symbolic. It must be genuine. When the system knows it can disengage safely, it relaxes. This relaxation is what allows engagement in the first place. Starting small also interrupts the identity threat. Large actions invite evaluation. Small actions feel experimental. They are easier to approach because they do not feel like a verdict on who you are. You are not proving anything. You are simply making contact. Contact is the goal. Completion is secondary. Over time, contact accumulates. Familiarity grows. What once felt threatening becomes ordinary. This is how capacity expands, not through force, but through exposure within tolerance. The motivation trap frames small starts as insufficient. It whispers that they will not lead anywhere meaningful. This is because the mind tends to think in outcomes rather than processes. It wants assurance that effort will pay off. Small starts do not provide dramatic feedback. They work quietly. Their effect is cumulative. The nervous system updates slowly. It learns through repetition, not reasoning. Each small start that does not result in overwhelm or self-attack weakens the association between action and threat. This is not immediately noticeable, but over time, resistance loses intensity. Starting becomes less dramatic. You may notice that you begin more quickly, not because you are more motivated, but because the internal negotiation shortens. Another reason small starts are resisted is perfectionism. There is often an implicit belief that if you begin, you should do it well. Small starts challenge this belief. They prioritize movement over quality. This can feel uncomfortable if your self-worth is tied to performance. But quality improves with engagement, not before it. Waiting to feel capable delays the practice that would build capability. Small starts allow you to practice without pressure. They decouple action from evaluation. This separation is essential for leaving the trap. The strategy of starting small also counters the all-or-nothing pattern common in procrastination. Many people oscillate between total avoidance and intense overwork. Small starts create a middle ground. They introduce moderation. Moderation is often unfamiliar to systems that learn to move only under pressure. But moderation is more sustainable. It reduces burnout. It builds trust. It allows action to coexist with rest. This balance weakens the motivation trap because it removes the need for extremes. The system no longer has to wait for a surge of energy to act. It can operate within normal fluctuations. Starting small also changes how time is experienced. Large tasks feel heavy because they are imagined as taking over the day. Small starts shrink the time horizon. 5 minutes does not threaten the rest of your schedule. This reduces anticipatory stress. Stress suppresses motivation. Reducing stress increases the likelihood of engagement. Even if you stop after the planned time, something important has happened. You have interrupted the avoidance loop. You have reminded the system that action is possible without crisis. This reminder matters more than output in the early stages of change. A common fear is that small starts will become an excuse to do very little. But avoidance thrives on pressure, not gentleness. When the system feels safe, it often continues naturally. Not always, but often. And even when it does not, the consistency of small starts builds momentum over time. Momentum is not speed. It is direction. Direction is established by repetition, not intensity. The motivation trap collapses when you no longer require a specific feeling to begin. Small starts remove that requirement. They lower the activation threshold. They make action accessible in more states. This increases overall engagement. You are no longer limited to rare moments of inspiration. You can move on ordinary days. This is where real change happens. Ordinary days make up most of life. The strategy only works if you protect its smallness. The moment you turn a small start into a test or expectation, it loses effectiveness. The system senses the shift and resists. This requires discipline of a different kind. Not discipline to push harder, but discipline to stop early. To respect the boundary. To leave capacity unused. This feels counterintuitive, but it is essential. Leaving capacity unused teaches the system that engagement does not require depletion. Over time, capacity grows because it is no longer being drained. Starting small is not a temporary trick. It is a way of relating to action. It changes the internal environment. It makes movement normal rather than exceptional. When action becomes normal, motivation becomes less relevant. You stop asking whether you feel like starting. You start because starting is tolerable. The motivation trap loses its power not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. In the next chapter, we will look at how internal pressure rebuilds the trap, even when you are taking small steps, and how to prevent progress from turning back into another form of self-demand. Chapter 4. When progress turns into pressure. At some point, starting small begins to work. You manage to show up more consistently. You feel less stuck. Movement becomes possible without waiting for motivation. And then, quietly, something shifts. The very progress that helped you escape the trap begins to rebuild it. Pressure returns, not from outside, but from within. This is one of the least discussed dynamics of change. Progress increases expectation. Expectation creates pressure. Pressure reactivates the system's protective response. Motivation drops again. The trap reforms in a new shape. This is why many people experience an initial breakthrough, followed by another period of stagnation. It is not because the strategy failed. It is because the internal rules changed. What was once optional becomes mandatory. What was once gentle becomes required. The system notices this shift immediately. It senses that engagement is no longer safe. It anticipates self-judgment if consistency breaks. It prepares to protect you by slowing things down. Pressure often sounds reasonable. It may take the form of thoughts like, "I've started, so I need to keep going," or, "If I stop now, I'll lose momentum." These thoughts frame rest as danger. They turn progress into a fragile state that must be maintained at all costs. The nervous system does not respond well to fragility. It prefers stability. When action feels like something you must protect, it becomes stressful. Stress suppresses motivation. The irony is that the desire to maintain progress creates the conditions for relapse. The motivation trap rebuilds itself through internal contracts. You may not consciously make them, but they form nonetheless. If I start, I have to finish. If I do this today, I must do it every day. If I prove I can do this, I'll have no excuse not to. These contracts turn action into obligation. Obligation feels heavy. The system associates it with loss of freedom. When freedom feels threatened, avoidance becomes attractive again. Delay restores a sense of choice. Pressure also arises from comparison. Once you begin to move, you may start comparing your pace to others or to an imagined standard. You question whether you are doing enough for what is rarely clear. This comparison reintroduces evaluation. Evaluation raises stakes. Raised stakes activate protection. The system does not distinguish between external judgment and internal judgment. Both feel the same. Motivation fades not because you are incapable, but because the emotional cost of continuing has increased. Another way progress turns into pressure is through identity shift. As you begin to act differently, you may start to see yourself as someone who is finally getting it together. This identity feels good, but it is also fragile. There is now something to lose. The fear of falling back can be more paralyzing than the original stagnation. The system prepares to avoid failure by slowing down engagement. This can feel confusing. You may wonder why it was easier to start than to continue. The answer lies in the change in emotional stakes. Starting small works because it lowers stakes. When you turn progress into proof, stakes rise again. The motivation trap thrives on high stakes. It does not care whether they come from ambition or fear. It responds to both the same way. Internal pressure often masquerades as discipline. You may tell yourself that you are just trying to be consistent. But consistency driven by fear of regression is not regulation. It is control. Control feels tense. Tension reduces flexibility. Flexibility is what allows action to adapt to changing internal states. Without it, the system becomes rigid. Rigidity breaks under stress. The trap returns. Preventing this requires redefining what progress means. Progress is not a straight line. It is a pattern of engagement that includes fluctuation. When fluctuation is allowed, the system remains calm. When fluctuation is forbidden, the system rebels. This rebellion looks like procrastination. The solution is not to abandon structure, but to soften it. Structure should support regulation, not demand performance. This means building in permission to slow down, to pause, and to return without punishment. The system must trust that engagement is reversible. If stopping feels dangerous, starting will eventually feel dangerous too. Another key is separating action from self-evaluation. You can notice whether you showed up without interpreting what that means about you. This neutrality reduces pressure. It keeps the emotional load manageable. The moment you turn action into a measure of worth, pressure increases. Motivation declines. The trap reappears. Progress must remain informational, not evaluative. It tells you what is possible, not who you are. The motivation trap rebuilds itself whenever action becomes a demand rather than an option. Options feel safe. Demands feel threatening. Even self-imposed demands activate resistance. The system does not respond to the source of pressure. It responds to its presence. Learning to continue without turning progress into pressure is a skill. It requires attention to internal tone, expectations, and pacing. It requires restraint in moments when you feel capable. Restraint may feel counterintuitive. Why stop when things are working? Because stopping by choice preserves safety. Safety preserves access to action. This is how momentum is sustained without force. When progress is allowed to breathe, motivation becomes unnecessary. Action continues not because you are pushing, but because nothing is blocking it. In the next chapter, we will explore how to build a system that supports action across different emotional states, so movement does not depend on feeling good, confident, or motivated. Chapter 5. Building a system that works without motivation. If action depends on how you feel, it will always be inconsistent. Feelings change constantly. Energy fluctuates. Focus rises and falls. A system that works only in ideal conditions is not a system. It is a hope. Leaving the motivation trap requires shifting from emotion-based action to structure-based action. This does not mean becoming rigid or mechanical. It means creating conditions that support movement even when motivation is absent. A functional system does not ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" It asks, "What is the smallest, safest way to engage right now?" This shift removes emotion from the decision-making role, without denying its presence. The system acknowledges feelings, but does not wait for them to change before acting. One of the most important elements of such a system is predictability. The nervous system relaxes when it knows what to expect. When action happens at random times, in random ways, the system must stay alert. Alertness consumes energy. Motivation drops. Predictability reduces the need for constant internal negotiation. This does not mean strict schedules. It means consistent cues, a specific time of day, a familiar environment, a clear starting ritual. These cues signal to the system that engagement is limited and known. This reduces resistance. Another essential element is bounded effort. The system needs to know how much will be required. Open-ended tasks feel infinite. Infinite tasks feel threatening. When effort is clearly bounded, the emotional load decreases. This boundary must be respected. If you repeatedly exceed it, the system learns that boundaries are unreliable. Trust erodes. Resistance returns. A system that works without motivation relies on honoring limits, not pushing them. This builds internal safety. Safety makes action accessible. The system should also separate initiation from continuation. Initiation is often the hardest part. Continuation becomes easier once contact is made. By designing a system that focuses only on initiation, you reduce pressure. You are not committing to completing the task. You are committing to starting it. This distinction matters. It keeps expectations low and engagement possible. Over time, continuation may happen naturally, but it is not required. The system learns that starting does not trap you. This reduces fear. Another component is neutral tracking. Many people avoid tracking because it feels judgmental, but tracking itself is not the problem. Evaluation is. Neutral tracking simply records contact. Did you show up or not? No interpretation, no conclusions. This provides evidence without pressure. Evidence helps the system update its beliefs. It learns that action can occur across different emotional states. This weakens the motivation trap. A system without motivation also requires flexibility. Rigid systems break under stress. Flexible systems adapt. Flexibility means adjusting duration, intensity, or timing without abandoning the process entirely. It means allowing imperfect engagement. Perfectionism often disguises itself as high standards, but it undermines consistency. A flexible system values continuity over quality. Quality improves through continuity, not the other way around. Rest must be built into the system, not earned through exhaustion. When rest is conditional, the system learns that action leads to depletion. This association suppresses motivation further. When rest is predictable and allowed, the system does not need to protect itself through avoidance. It knows recovery is coming. This reduces internal resistance to engagement. Another key element is environment design. Willpower is unreliable. Environment is not. A system that works without motivation minimizes friction. Tools are visible. Distractions are limited. The path to starting is short. Each removed obstacle reduces the need for motivation. The system responds to ease. Ease invites movement. Difficulty invites delay. This is not about making things trivial. It is about removing unnecessary barriers. The system should also include permission to disengage. This may seem counterintuitive, but it is critical. When stopping feels forbidden, starting becomes dangerous. Permission to disengage keeps engagement voluntary. Voluntary action feels safer than forced action. Safety increases willingness. This is how a system sustains itself. It does not trap you. It invites you. Over time, something subtle happens. You stop thinking about motivation altogether. You no longer ask whether you feel ready. You engage because engagement is part of the structure of your day. It does not require a special state. It fits into ordinary life. This is the point where the motivation trap loses relevance. Action is no longer an event. It is a process. The system works because it respects how humans actually function, not how they wish they did. It accounts for variability. emotion, and limitation. It does not demand consistency of feeling, only consistency of contact. This is sustainable. It allows progress without pressure. The final shift happens when identity catches up with behavior. You begin to see yourself as someone who shows up, even imperfectly. This identity is not built on motivation. It is built on evidence. Evidence is calming. It stabilizes self-perception. The motivation trap dissolves not through effort, but through design. When action is supported structurally, motivation becomes optional. You no longer wait for it. You no longer chase it. You move without it. In the final chapter, we will explore how this system reshapes identity over time and what it means to become someone who acts consistently without relying on internal force. Chapter 6. Becoming someone who acts without needing motivation. The final shift out of the motivation trap is not behavioral, it is identity-based. Behavior changes first, but identity changes last. This is why progress can feel unstable at the beginning. You may act differently, but still think of yourself as someone who struggles. The mind has not yet updated its story. Over time, repeated evidence changes that story. You do not become someone who acts because you decide to. You become that person because your system observes what you consistently do. Identity follows experience, not intention. Becoming someone who acts without motivation does not mean you never feel resistance. Resistance does not disappear. It simply loses authority. It stops deciding for you. You may still notice hesitation, fatigue, or lack of interest. The difference is that these states no longer block engagement completely. They become part of the landscape rather than stop signs. This happens when action is no longer framed as a test of worth. When starting is just starting, not proving. The motivation trap collapses when action is stripped of drama. Drama fuels resistance. Ordinary engagement weakens it. One of the most important identity shifts is letting go of the idea that you need to feel a certain way to act. When action is linked to mood, you remain reactive. Your internal state dictates your external behavior. When action is linked to structure and choice, you regain agency. You act because you choose to, not because you feel inspired. This does not make you rigid, it makes you free. Freedom is not the absence of discomfort. It is the ability to move with discomfort present. Another key shift is redefining effort. In the motivation trap, effort is seen as something that requires energy you do not have. You wait until energy appears. In a regulated system, effort is distributed. It is light, it is contained. You stop equating effort with exhaustion. When effort is small and predictable, it no longer feels threatening. Action becomes something you can do on average days, not only good ones. This normalizes movement. Normalization is powerful. What is normal does not require motivation. It simply happens. Identity changes when you stop making action exceptional. The person you are becoming does not need to feel ready. They need to feel safe enough. Safety comes from trust. Trust is built when you consistently keep agreements that match your capacity. Overpromising breaks trust. Underpromising and following through builds it. Each time you act within your limits and stop without punishment, trust increases. The system learns that engagement does not trap you. This trust reduces resistance more effectively than any motivational technique. Over time, you may notice that you begin without thinking as much. The internal debate shortens. This is not because you have become more disciplined. It is because the system no longer anticipates danger. Starting does not trigger alarm. It triggers routine. Routine is the opposite of the motivation trap. The trap thrives on internal negotiation. Routine bypasses it. The identity of someone who acts is built on reliability, not intensity. Reliability means showing up in ways you can sustain. It means accepting fluctuation without interpreting it as failure. It means understanding that consistency is not perfection, it is continuity. Continuity allows identity to stabilize. When identity stabilizes, motivation becomes irrelevant. You no longer need to convince yourself to act. You act because this is what you do. Another important shift is releasing the need to feel aligned before moving. Alignment is often imagined as a clear, confident internal state. In reality, alignment is created through action. You discover clarity by doing, not by waiting. When you act without motivation, you give yourself access to feedback. Feedback refines direction. Direction strengthens alignment. The process works in reverse from what the trap suggests. You do not wait to feel aligned. You act, adjust, and alignment emerges. The person you are becoming understands this sequence. They do not wait for certainty. They work with information as it appears. Acting without motivation also changes your relationship with time. You stop treating time as something you need to feel ready to use well. You use time as it is, imperfectly, repeatedly, without ceremony. This removes pressure. Pressure distorts perception. When pressure is low, time feels more available. You stop feeling behind. Feeling behind is a major driver of avoidance. When that feeling fades, engagement becomes easier. Identity shifts are often quiet. You may not notice a dramatic moment where you feel transformed. Instead, you notice that certain questions stop appearing. You stop asking, "Why can't I just do this?" You stop searching for motivation. You stop consuming content to feel ready. These absences are signs of change. The trap loses relevance when it is no longer consulted. You do not defeat it. You outgrow it. The final understanding is this: motivation was never the problem. Waiting for it was. You were not missing something. You were responding correctly to an unsafe internal environment. Once that environment changes, behavior follows naturally. Acting without motivation does not mean acting without care. It means acting without conditions. Care is expressed through pacing, boundaries, and self-respect. Force is replaced with structure. Pressure is replaced with choice. Over time, this becomes who you are. Not someone who always acts, but someone who can act when it matters, without needing to be pushed by fear or driven by inspiration. This identity is stable because it is based on evidence, not emotion. You do not need to feel motivated to trust yourself. You trust yourself because you have learned, through experience, that you show up. That trust is the real opposite of the motivation trap. When you have it, the trap no longer controls your movement. You move because movement is available to you. And once movement is available, progress is no longer a struggle. It is a process you know how to return to, again and again, without force.